Rain hammered against the cracked asphalt, blurring the streetlights into smeared halos that flickered with every gust of wind. A small shape shivered beneath the flickering glow of a broken lamppost. A puppy no bigger than a loaf of bread, soaked through and trembling, its eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. In that instant, the world felt impossibly large, overwhelming in its cold, dark indifference. The puddles reflected the neon advertisements above, distorted like memories that had lost their shape, while the soft whimpers of the tiny creature cut through the storm like a fragile thread of hope. Miles away, in the dimly lit interior of a rundown shelter, James, an ex-Navy SEAL whose life had long since been calibrated to precision, order, and control, felt a pull he hadn't felt in years. His hands, roughened by decades of discipline, clenched the steering wheel as if trying to tether himself to something steady. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside him. Memories of missions gone wrong, friends lost, the gnawing ache of purpose unfulfilled. And then, through the curtain of rain, their eyes met, tiny, defiant, and impossibly human in their expression. For a heartbeat, everything froze, the world, the storm, the weight of his own regrets. And James realized that sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. Show your love, hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The rain fell like a relentless drum, each drop striking the cracked asphalt with the sound of a world unraveling. Streetlights blurred into halos of trembling gold, their light smeared by the sheets of water that streaked down windows and pooled along gutters. A shiver ran through the tiny form crouched beneath a broken lamppost, a little puppy, soaked to the bone, trembling with each gust of wind. Its fur clung to its fragile body, matted and darkened by mud, and its eyes, round, wet, and impossibly wide, reflected not just the neon advertisements above, but the storm itself, the raw chaos of a city indifferent to its smallest inhabitants. Every corner of the street seemed threatening, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the clang of a distant dumpster lid, the roar of a passing motorcycle. Yet despite every instinct screaming to hide, the puppy stayed, ears perked and nose sniffing the wet air, as if it could sense a thread of hope just beyond the storm. James drove slowly through the sheets of rain, his windshield wipers slicing through the gray blur in uneven, stuttering sweeps. The ex-SEAL knuckles were white around the steering wheel, fingers stiff and roughened from years of training, discipline, and a life spent measuring every risk. His heart was heavy, weighed down by memories he rarely allowed to surface. The cries of comrades lost, the orders given that could not be undone, the haunting echoes of missions where success felt hollow. Tonight, however, was different. Something about the storm, the way the city looked in its harsh, wet light, pulled at a part of him he hadn't felt in years. A thread of unease tugged him toward the corner of 11th and Monroe, though he couldn't have explained why. And then he saw it. The tiny, trembling figure huddled under the broken lamppost, its soaked fur glistening in the flickering light, eyes locking with his, as if recognizing a soul that had wandered too far from home. He parked hastily on the curb, tires hissing on the wet asphalt, and grabbed the small blanket from the passenger seat. Each step toward the puppy was cautious, every footfall a negotiation with instinct. The storm pressed down on him, cold and unyielding, but he felt a strange warmth spreading from his chest, a spark of purpose he hadn't realized he'd been starving for. The puppy's eyes tracked him, wide and cautious, tail tucked but twitching in rhythm with its small, desperate breaths. There was fear there, yes, but also a fierce, stubborn spark, an unspoken plea, a challenge, a hope that refused to bend. "Hey there, little guy," James whispered, voice low, steady, almost a murmur against the roar of rain. He extended the blanket slowly, a gesture of peace, of patience, of care. The puppy hesitated, every muscle taut, ears flattening against its head, paws trembling in the puddles beneath it. The world outside, the storm, the noise, the endless indifference was overwhelming. Yet somehow, in the warmth of that human voice, it flickered. The puppy inched forward, tiny nails slipping on slick concrete, and nuzzled the edge of the blanket. Its small body shook violently, yet there was trust, tentative and fragile, beginning to take root. James crouched low, rain dripping from his hood, soaking his sleeves and chilling him to the bone. Yet he didn't care. He had spent decades learning to face danger, to confront fear with precision and training. But nothing had prepared him for this quiet, trembling life, asking for care and protection. He whispered soft reassurances, words more instinctive than thought, and the puppy's quivering slowed, replaced by the softest whimper of relief. The storm seemed to pause for a heartbeat, as if acknowledging this fragile connection forming in its midst. He wrapped the blanket around the tiny body, feeling the slight weight, the heat seeping into his palms. The puppy's eyes closed briefly, exhausted but safe, and James felt something inside him shift. The hollow ache he had carried for years. The loneliness, the grief. The sense of purposelessness began to recede, replaced by a fragile thread of every drop of rain on his face, every gust of wind pushing against them, every distant sound of the city fading into the storm seemed to underline a simple, undeniable truth. Sometimes, the smallest life can remind you of the strength of your own heart. He lifted the puppy gently, cradling it against his chest, and felt the rapid heartbeat beneath the soaked fur. The warmth, the life, the sheer resilience in that tiny form struck him with a force he hadn't felt in years. He whispered to it, words of comfort, soft laughter mixing with the rumble of the storm, and for a moment the world felt impossibly still. Here, in the middle of chaos, connection had arrived. As he drove away, headlights cutting through the sheets of rain, James glanced down at the puppy. Its eyes, bright and trusting, met his, and a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of its head seemed to say more than words ever could. In that glance there was gratitude, recognition, and the faintest hint of mischief, as if the puppy already knew the adventure that lay ahead. James felt a warmth swell in his chest, a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet astonishment. Life, he realized, had a way of surprising you in the most unexpected forms. By the time he pulled into the small, dimly lit shelter, the rain had softened into a steady drizzle, the city's harsh noises muted by the thick walls and muffled steps of the few who lingered inside. He carried the puppy in his arms, the wet blanket damp against his chest, and felt an unspoken promise form between them. Protection, trust, and perhaps, in time, love. The puppy nuzzled closer, tiny paws kneading gently, its soft breath warm against his skin. James's fingers stroked the matted fur, untangling knots, feeling the life pulsing beneath, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel fully, without walls, without armor, without restraint. Outside, the storm continued, but inside there was warmth. There was laughter waiting to emerge. There was the quiet power of trust beginning to bloom. In the soft lamplight, the puppy's wide eyes reflected not just James's face, but the possibility of a new beginning, a fragile, trembling whisper of hope, loud enough to pierce the darkest storm. And in that moment, James knew something profound. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth, and the smallest life can awaken the deepest part of your soul. The morning light filtered weakly through the half-closed blinds, casting stripes of gold and shadow across the small shelter room. The storm from the night before had faded to a persistent drizzle, and the damp scent of wet fur mingled with the faint tang of disinfectant and old wood. James sat on the edge of a threadbare couch, the little puppy tucked carefully against his chest, shaking still, though now with the shiver of lingering nerves rather than cold. Its tiny body pressed against his, wet nose nuzzling the folds of his sleeve, eyes darting anxiously at every movement and sound. The air was thick with quiet tension, a fragile bridge between fear and hope that neither of them dared to cross too quick. James reached a rough hand into the soaked fur, stroking slowly, deliberately, letting the puppy set the rhythm. Every touch, every breath, every blink was a negotiation. The puppy's tail twitched under the blanket, hesitant but not entirely unwilling. James's own heart, long hardened by years of training and survival, mirrored the uncertainty of the moment, each beat echoing the quiet, careful rhythm of trust forming in slow, painstaking increments. He whispered to it, low murmurs that were more instinct than words, reassurance, promises, fragments of comfort. The puppy tilted its head, listening, testing, weighing the unfamiliar warmth of this human who smelled of rain, leather, and something undeniably safe. Hours passed like this, a slow dance of hesitation and courage. The puppy would inch forward a few steps, then retreat, ears flattening and tail tucked, only to be coaxed back again by James's patient presence. He watched its tiny chest rise and fall, its legs trembling as it took tentative steps, its small eyes wide with a delicate mixture of fear and curiosity. He noticed everything, the subtle flick of an ear at a distant cough, the quiver of paws against the hardwood floor, the way it would lean into him when he spoke softly, then flinch at sudden noises. Every small victory, every moment of courage felt monumental, a reminder that trust is never given freely. It is earned in fragments, in patience, in quiet observation. James guided the puppy toward the small patch of warmth near the heater. The little creature paused, sniffed cautiously, and then retreated under the couch. James smiled faintly, a sound almost foreign to his own ears, and spoke in the gentle tones reserved for the smallest, most delicate beings. "Take your time. No rush. You're safe here." The words hung in the room like fragile smoke, unassuming yet potent. Slowly, with trembling paws and cautious steps, the puppy emerged. It sniffed the floor, circled once, and then climbed into James's lap, resting its wet head on his knee. James felt the slight tremor beneath him, the rapid heartbeat of life clinging to him for reassurance, and he allowed himself to relax, just a fraction, into the unspoken bond forming between them. The afternoon light deepened, casting long shadows across the room, and the shelter became quieter. James found himself talking to the puppy, telling stories of distant missions, of friends lost and lessons learned, of nights that had seemed endless and days that had dragged on with hollow purpose. The puppy listened, tilting its head, pawing gently, blinking in silent acknowledgement. Its small presence demanded attention, required care, and in turn, James felt a strange release. Words he had not spoken in years flowed freely, a conversation conducted through tone, presence, and the fragile language of connection. He found humor creeping in, quiet laughter at the puppy's clumsy attempts to climb onto the couch, its tiny bark at a fluttering curtain, and the sudden, almost imperceptible tilt of its head, as if it were questioning the very world it had been thrust into. Evening approached, and the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, tapping gently against the windows. James prepared a small meal, placing it carefully on the floor. The puppy approached cautiously, sniffing the food, then retreating to James's side, as if seeking permission. He nodded gently, watching its tentative movements, and finally, it began to eat, one careful bite at a time, eyes flicking to his face for reassurance. He felt a swell of emotion he hadn't anticipated. The quiet pride in witnessing bravery, the warmth of a trust slowly taking root, and the unexpected joy in this tiny life that had, in a matter of hours, begun to anchor him in a way nothing else had. Later, James settled into the worn armchair, the puppy curled on the blanket across his lap. The room was quiet except for the occasional patter of rain and the soft hum of distant traffic. He watched it sleep, ears twitching, tiny paws flexing, a peaceful rise and fall of breath. He thought about the night before, the storm, the puddles, the fear in those wide eyes, and he realized that this moment, the calm after the storm, was not just a reprieve for the puppy, but for him as well. He allowed himself to feel fully, to breathe, to let the tension he had carried for years melt, at least a little, into the simple, profound act of care. In those hours of quiet, the puppy began to stretch its boundaries, nosing at James's sleeve, pawing gently, inching closer to the heat of the radiator, even attempting a playful leap that ended in a tumbling roll across the blanket. James's laughter broke softly into the room, a sound almost forgotten to him, yet natural in its joy. He realized that trust was reciprocal, fragile yet resilient, and that love, even in the smallest form, demanded patience, attention, and willingness to be vulnerable. The puppy's confidence, tentative as it was, mirrored his own tentative opening of the heart he had kept locked for so long. As night fell and the drizzle outside turned into the soft rhythm of a quiet city, James spoke once more to the little creature curled against him. "You're safe. You're home. And I'm glad you found me." The words were simple, almost ordinary, but in their delivery was a weight of unspoken understanding, of shared survival, of the delicate dawning realization that both of them had been lost. And now, in this small room, in the soft lamplight, they had found a fragile, shimmering tether to one another. The puppy twitched in its sleep as if acknowledging the promise and nestled closer, a tiny heartbeat echoing against his own, a whisper of trust that would grow with each passing day. By the time sleep overtook them both, the shelter was silent save for the soft rhythm of their breathing, a symphony of cautious hope and tentative love. Outside, the rain continued its gentle fall, but inside, in the shared warmth of presence, the storm had passed, at least for now, and a foundation of trust had been laid, quiet and unassuming, but unbreakable in its sincerity. The morning air smelled of wet earth and blooming grass, the rain from the previous night retreating into soft mist that lingered like memory over the city streets. James opened the door to the small courtyard behind the shelter, the puppy bouncing nervously on its tiny paws, ears flicking at every sound. The distant bark of a dog, the honk of a passing car, the whisper of wind through the trees. It was a world larger, louder, and more unpredictable than the dim shelter room, and the puppy's caution was palpable. Yet beneath the trembling hesitation was a spark, an unspoken courage waiting for the right moment to ignite. James knelt low on the slick grass, letting his hand hover in the space between encouragement and coercion, a silent invitation to step forward, to risk trust, to embrace the unknown. The puppy inched forward, tentative at first, nose twitching as it explored the wet blades of grass. James's voice was low and steady, almost a hum, guiding without command. "It's okay. You can do this, just one step at a time." He watched the tiny chest rise and fall, the delicate muscles tensing and releasing with every cautious movement, and felt a swell of admiration for the bravery condensed in such a fragile form. The puppy paused, shaking its small body, then darted toward a puddle, tentative feet splashing in shallow water. Its first bark, high and uncertain, carried across the courtyard, and James felt a spark of joy, a quiet recognition that courage often begins with a single trembling step into the unknown. As days passed, these excursions became lessons in courage, each small challenge a mirror for James himself. They navigated crowded sidewalks, the chaos of city life pressing against them, testing patience and resolve. The puppy flinched at loud trucks, recoiled from sudden movements, yet learned to stand its ground with James at its side, a constant presence of reassurance. In turn, James confronted his own fears, the memories that surfaced unexpectedly. The sharp crack of gunfire, the weight of decisions he had made, the faces of those he had failed. Each day with the puppy demanded presence, focus, and vulnerability, forcing him to relinquish control and trust instinct, empathy, and the unspoken bond forming between them. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered weakly through the gray clouds, they encountered a narrow alleyway lined with tall brick walls and littered with debris. The puppy hesitated at the threshold, nose twitching, eyes wide. James crouched low, steadying himself, and whispered, "It's okay, I've..." The moment stretched, elongated by the weight of decision, fear, and potential danger. The puppy took a single deliberate step forward, then another, then a small leap over a puddle, fur bristling but posture unyielding. Each step was a tiny triumph, a miniature act of bravery that spoke louder than words ever could. James felt his own chest tighten, the echoes of old missions, failed expectations, and unspoken grief dissolving in the quiet power of witnessing courage born anew. Training sessions became games of trust, navigating makeshift obstacle courses, retrieving sticks, exploring unfamiliar terrain. The puppy's confidence grew, tiny leaps replacing tentative steps, playful barks replacing high-pitched whimpers. James laughed freely, a sound unburdened by duty or fear, the sheer joy of shared discovery lifting the weight he had carried for years. Each misstep, each stumble, each victorious leap became a lesson, not just for the puppy, but for James as well. Courage, he realized, was less about fearlessness and more about persistence. The willingness to face uncertainty together, to falter and rise again, to find trust even when the path is treacherous. One evening, a sudden clap of thunder sent the puppy darting under the sofa, ears pinned and body trembling. James knelt beside it, hands hovering, voice calm and low. "I'm here. It's just a sound. You're safe." The puppy peeked out, eyes large and wary, then slowly crept forward, pressing its small body against his chest. The storm outside mirrored the tension within him, the echo of memories that refused to fade. But the act of patience, the delicate encouragement, and the shared presence dissolved fear in small increments. James felt the raw power of trust, the courage of being present for another life, and a quiet pride in the resilience growing in both of them. As weeks turned into months, the puppy began to explore beyond the confines of the shelter courtyard. It ran across lawns, chased shadows, and approached strangers with cautious curiosity. James followed, a silent guardian guiding without interference, letting the puppy test boundaries, confront fears, and assert its small but growing independence. In turn, James noticed subtle changes in himself. His steps lighter, his voice gentler, his laughter easier to access. The lessons in courage were mutual, each teaching the other about trust, resilience, and the quiet, transformative power of companionship. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection, the puppy curled against James's chest, warmth radiating through the damp chill of returning autumn nights. He stroked its fur, untangling knots, tracing the outline of ears, feeling the rise and fall of its small chest. Each heartbeat, each soft whine, each tentative lick of his hand reinforced a simple truth. Courage is not solitary. It is woven through connection, through care, through the willingness to face uncertainty together. He whispered stories of distant lands, missions that had tested his body and spirit, and the puppy listened, eyes bright, ears flicking, pawing gently, as if acknowledging the lessons being shared in silence. One crisp morning, the puppy took a bold leap onto a low wall, surveying the courtyard with a newfound confidence. James's breath caught, pride and astonishment mingling, and he whispered softly, "You did it. That's bravery." The puppy wagged its tail furiously, tiny leaps of excitement punctuating the moment, and James realized that every step, every bark, every cautious exploration had transformed fear into something more powerful: understanding, resilience, and joy. The lessons in courage were not confined to the physical. They were etched in the emotional bond, in the quiet reassurance, in the presence of two beings learning to navigate the world together. By the time the sun dipped behind distant rooftops, casting long shadows over the courtyard, the puppy rested, eyes half closed, paws stretching lazily, ears twitching with residual excitement. James sat beside it, chest pressed against the small form, feeling warmth, trust, and an unspoken promise that they would continue learning from one another. The world remained vast, unpredictable, and at times terrifying. Yet in that moment, courage was simple: presence, patience, and the quiet, unwavering bond that had begun in the storm and now flourished in golden light. The sky darkened with the sudden arrival of storm clouds, heavy and oppressive, casting long shadows across the city streets, as if warning of unseen danger. James and the puppy walked along the narrow alleyway that led from the shelter, the puppy's paws hesitant against slick cobblestones, ears flattened at the distant echo of thunder. The air was thick with electricity, carrying the smell of rain and wet asphalt, a tangible tension that seemed to press against their chests. James felt it too, the storm-stirring memories he had long buried, missions gone wrong, decisions that had cost lives, the searing weight of responsibility that never truly left. The puppy pressed closer, sensing the shift in his posture, small body quivering yet trusting, and he realized that the storm outside mirrored the turbulence within. They reached the edge of the alley just as a sudden crash startled them, a metal trash can overturned by the wind, clattering against the brick wall. The puppy leaped backward, yipping, fur bristling, and James instinctively swooped down, wrapping his arms around the small frame. He whispered low, steady words, a lifeline in the chaos. "It's okay, I've got you, you're safe." The puppy's trembling slowed slightly, ears flicking at the sound of his voice, and James felt a pang of recognition. Courage was being tested not just in action, but in presence, in calm amid sudden chaos. The tiny heartbeat, pressed against his chest, echoed his own, rapid and wild, and for a moment he allowed himself to be fully present in the storm, in its fear and its beauty. The rain began again, heavier now, drumming against rooftops and splashing in puddles that reflected the distorted neon lights above. They had to cross the street, and James's eyes scanned for danger: the slick road, speeding cars, uneven sidewalks. The puppy hesitated, small paws shivering, ears pinned, tail tucked tightly. James knelt low, arms open, inviting yet firm, letting the puppy feel the assurance of his presence. "One step at a time," he murmured, voice calm yet deliberate. The puppy inched forward, hesitant at first, then faster, propelled by instinct and trust, finally vaulting into his arms as they navigated the last stretch of street together. The city seemed to blur around them, the storm compressing into a narrow tunnel of sound and sensation, each heartbeat magnified, each breath a fragile affirmation of survival. They reached a quieter section of the city, a park with trees bending under the wind, puddles forming small, trembling mirrors on the grass. The puppy squirmed in James's arms, anxious but determined, sniffing the wet ground, ears twitching at each gust. Suddenly, a larger dog appeared, leash taut in the hands of a startled owner. The puppy froze, hackles raised, fur puffing in a defensive display. James dropped to one knee, placing himself between the two, hands calm yet authoritative. "Easy," he murmured. "We're safe. You're okay." The puppy hesitated, eyes wide, then slowly relaxed against his chest, a tremor of relief passing through its body. James exhaled, heart pounding, reminded once more that courage was not the absence of fear, but the conscious decision to face it together. As the storm intensified, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the park in stark white flashes. James could feel the old tension clawing at him, The memories of impossible choices, of friends lost, of missions that ended in silence rather than celebration. His fingers absently stroked the puppy's fur, each stroke a grounding ritual, a tether to the present. The puppy looked up, eyes bright with curiosity and trust, and he realized that despite the storm, outside and inside, there was a bridge forming between them, fragile yet unbreakable. In that gaze was the raw power of companionship, a small life teaching a hardened man the art of resilience, of calm, of facing the unpredictable with patience and love. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air, the sound of someone struggling nearby. James's body reacted before thought, instincts honed from years of service kicking in. The puppy yipped anxiously, pressing closer to him, and he assessed the situation. A young boy had slipped into a shallow creek that had swollen with the storm water. The current was weak but rapid, and panic was rising in the boy's small voice. James acted swiftly, moving with careful precision, arms scooping the child from the water while keeping the puppy safely tucked under one arm. The boy clung to him, teeth chattering, eyes wide with shock and fear, and the puppy let out a high-pitched bark, as if celebrating survival while warning of vigilance. In that moment, chaos and courage collided, and James realized the full measure of bravery: presence under pressure, calm under fear, and trust shared across lives. After the boy was safe on the bank, the puppy crawled into James's lap, damp fur sticking to his coat, paws kneading gently, eyes wide yet peaceful. James laughed softly, a sound raw with release, exhaustion, and relief. He wrapped his arms around the tiny body, feeling its heartbeat steadying against his own. The storm raged on, relentless, but inside that small circle of warmth, fear was replaced with triumph, panic with understanding, chaos with connection. Both man and dog had faced the storm, outside and within, and emerged changed, strengthened, united. By the time they returned to the shelter, drenched and shivering, the puppy's confidence had grown despite the trials, and James's chest carried a lightness he had not felt in years. He stripped away the wet layers of coat and blanket, drying fur and damp clothes with deliberate care, feeling each touch as an affirmation. They had survived together, and in doing so had learned that courage is never solitary. The puppy curled into the corner of his arms, paws flexing lazily, ears flicking with awareness, and James felt a quiet awe. This tiny life had faced fear and emerged resilient, and in witnessing it, he too had confronted ghosts, emerged unbroken, and felt the fragile strength of trust. Evening fell, the storm retreating into distant rumble, leaving the air scented with wet earth and renewal. James settled on the couch, the puppy nestled against him, warmth radiating through both bodies. He stroked its fur slowly, mind replaying the events of the day. Fear confronted, panic mastered, trust forged in chaos. The puppy's eyelids drooped, tiny paws twitching in dreams, and he realized that storms, no matter how fierce, could not extinguish the courage born from connection. Together they had faced the tempest, and together they had emerged tempered, resilient, and unafraid to step into the unknown once more. In the quiet aftermath, James whispered softly to the puppy, "You were brave today. We were brave together." The words lingered, carried by the fading rhythm of rain, as both man and dog sank into the deep, restorative silence of shared triumph. Outside, lightning still flashed in the far distance, a reminder of the world's unpredictability. Yet inside, in the warmth of trust, the storm had passed. Courage, James understood, was not the absence of fear. It was the willingness to face it, side by side, heart to heart. The first rays of morning filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in gentle strokes of gold and amber. Outside, the city stretched awake, its streets glistening with residual rain, the smell of wet concrete and earth mingling in the crisp air. The puppy stirred, small nose twitching, ears flicking at distant sounds, and James smiled as he watched it stretch, paws flexing, tiny claws catching the light. It had grown bolder over the past weeks, each step of trust and courage building toward this quiet, unassuming day of calm. The warmth of its presence against his chest filled him with a gentle astonishment. This small life, once trembling and fragile, now radiated vitality and joy, and in turn had rekindled something long dormant in him. James rose slowly, the puppy following with tentative hops and playful yips. Together they moved through the apartment, each corner familiar now, every shadow no longer a threat but a canvas for exploration and play. He poured a small dish of food, watching as the puppy approached cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, tail wagging furiously, paw skidding slightly on the hardwood floor. Its first bite was tentative. Then it devoured the rest with a spirited determination, eyes flicking up at him as if to say, "Look what I can do." James laughed softly, the sound full and unburdened echoing in the quiet room. For the first time in years he felt fully present, the weight of past regrets momentarily lifted by the simple, radiant joy of shared life. Later, they ventured outside into the park near the apartment, the air crisp, the sun glinting off puddles like scattered diamonds. The puppy ran ahead, bounding through shallow water, ears flopping with every leap, tail wagging with abandon. James followed, a relaxed smile on his face, chest lighter than it had been in decades. Children waved from the playground, dogs barked in the distance, and the city, once a cacophony of fear and caution, now felt alive with possibility. The puppy's confidence was contagious, its energy a gentle force that reminded him of the beauty and simplicity, the extraordinary found in ordinary moments. As they walked, a group of people paused to watch, enchanted by the small creature's fearless antics. The puppy approached them with curiosity, sniffing hands extended in tentative welcome, then bounding back to James for reassurance. Laughter and murmurs of delight followed its movements, and he realized how far they had come together. Fear, once omnipresent, had given way to courage. Hesitation had blossomed into exploration. Anxiety had transformed into playful engagement. The bond between them, forged in storms both literal and emotional, had reached a point of quiet perfection, a mutual understanding that transcended words. Returning home, James settled into his favorite chair, the puppy curling into the crook of his arm. For warm and dry, he ran his hand gently over its back, untangling the small knots that still lingered from their early days together. Memories of the storm, the alleyway, the trembling moments of tentative trust, and the crisis at the creek flashed through him. Each one now carried a different weight, less fear, more triumph. He whispered softly to the puppy, recounting fragments of their shared journey, stories of survival, courage, and trust. The puppy listened, ears flicking, tiny nose pressing closer, a gentle paw kneading his sleeve as if marking each word as understood. In these quiet moments, James felt the profound truth that connection can heal wounds thought permanent, that even the smallest life can guide the largest heart back to itself. Afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating the tiny particles of dust that danced lazily in the warmth of the room. James watched the puppy chase its own shadow, yipping in delight at the simple, unforced joy of existence. He laughed, a low, rolling sound that carried relief, gratitude, and awe. The world outside continued its rhythm, indifferent and unpredictable, yet here, in the sanctuary of trust and presence, there was peace. He reflected on the storms they had weathered together, literal rains that had soaked fur and soaked spirits, and metaphorical storms that had tested courage, patience, and resilience. Both had emerged tempered, scarred, but unbroken, their bond stronger for the trials faced together. Evening settled over the city, painting the skyline in hues of rose and lavender. The puppy rested against James' tiny breath synchronized with his own, a heartbeat echoing warmth and connect. He stroked the soft fur, fingers tracing ears, shoulders, and tiny paws, marveling at how something so small could carry such magnitude of trust, of resilience, of love. Outside, the last traces of storm clouds dissolved, leaving a sky clear and vast, hinting at infinite possibility. James's gaze followed the sun sinking slowly, the light spilling across rooftops, streets, and trees, illuminating the world as if inviting them both into a future unburdened by fear. That night, James sat on the balcony, the puppy perched on his lap, eyes wide and attentive, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The world had not changed. Storms would come again, challenges would rise. But within the quiet strength of their bond, he felt invincible. Laughter bubbled up as the puppy made a sudden, unexpected noise. A bark, a grunt, a yip that carried the hint of playful personality and undeniable charm. James shook his head, smiling, the sound of his own amusement mingling with the soft night air. Somehow, in the smallest gestures and the quietest moments, life had reclaimed its color, its texture, its heartbeat. As he tucked the puppy into a small bed beside him, fur warm and eyes drooping with sleep, James whispered softly, almost reverently, "You've changed me. We've changed each other." The puppy nuzzled closer, a tiny sigh escaping as if understanding the weight and beauty of the moment. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent yet magnificent, And for the first time in years, James allowed himself to rest fully, to feel the completeness of being alive, of being connected, of being loved. The final rays of light disappeared, leaving the room bathed in gentle shadow, a quiet contrast to the storms of the past. The puppy, breathing softly, nestled against his chest, and James closed his eyes, allowing a smile to curl his lips. The storms, both outside and within, had passed, leaving clarity, warmth, and a profound understanding. Love, courage, and trust, even when smallest, hold the power to heal, transform, and illuminate. Together they had faced darkness, uncertainty, and fear, and together they had emerged into light. And in that stillness, in the gentle rise and fall of tiny breaths, James understood a truth both simple and eternal. Sometimes the smallest life carries the brightest light, and in following that light, even the hardest heart can find home.